right, everyone. Start the meeting. We have a long day ahead of us for Planning and Strategic Initiatives Committee. This is part one. I'll just take any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none, there's no consent items other than, draft plan condominium. I'll take a mover. Consent item moved by Councillor Clancy. I see no discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. All right, before we begin, I'll just quickly remind for delegations that the guidelines for participation. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manner, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting, and that is for interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, hate speech, or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations, please do not take offense. If following your presentation there are no questions from council, this is council's time to really listen and reflect on the opinions and ideas shared with us from our members in the community. And discussion items for 6.1 for inclusionary zoning and policy and implementation direction. Mr. Donaghy, I think you are presenting first. You have 10 minutes, so when you're ready, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Singh and members of council. It's a pleasure to speak to you about this matter again today. So proud to share with you the work we've been doing so far in inclusionary zoning. This is a joint initiative with the cities of Waterloo and City of Cambridge, as well as the region of Waterloo. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a level set. What is inclusionary zoning? We've talked about it before, but it is a policy and zoning requirement that can require private developers to include some affordable units within new multi-unit housing developments. The program can vary, crucially, the percentage of affordable units in a development, sometimes called the set-aside rate, the depth of affordability, so how low the rents or prices are compared to market, and the duration or the length of time those units can be affordable. So the Planning Act says that inclusionary zoning can only happen within major transit station areas, so that's generally a 500 to 800 meter radius around the ION network, both the ION light rail and the BRT network from Fairway down to Cambridge. So that's a legislative requirement that it can only occur within MTSAs, but we also think it's important that affordable housing be part of the picture when we plan for complete and mixed income communities around our ION stops. It's also the area where we've seen significant growth across the region in recent years. So I want to go back to some of the early principles that we worked with when we started this work back in 2020. These are 5 key ones that we've talked about throughout the study, and they sort of bear reminding, I think. So the first one is partnering with the development community. So because inclusionary zoning units are delivered alongside market rate units, it's important that we partner with the development community and that any program works for them. Capturing value in new density. So what that means is that as we invest in ION light transit, as we see development permissions and applications happen for more density, as we see an increased desire for increased urban living, that generates an increase in value. And some of that increase in value can be captured and directed towards the provision of new affordable housing units that we wouldn't have had anyways. Long-term affordability. So inclusionary zoning generally works where it's not subject to significant subsidy. So that means year over year it can deliver units without going up and down with the whims of various budgets. Moderate affordability. So when we see inclusionary zoning in jurisdictions across North America, typically they focus on moderate affordability rather than really deeply affordable units. And minimizing land market disruption. So that's the final principle. We want to make sure that as we develop an inclusionary zoning policy, we don't shock the market unduly and have unintended consequences on the housing market. So in the fall of last year, the province introduced Bill 23, and alongside that proposed changes to the inclusionary zoning regime. Those didn't exist when we started this project in 2020. Those look like a maximum 5% set aside, so that's the maximum amount of units in percentage terms that can be required to be affordable. A 25-year affordability requirement, that's the longest we could afford or require units to be affordable. Maximum prices and rents that are set at 80% of average market rent or average resale price, and no development charges, community benefits charges, or parkland dedication requirements imposed on inclusionary zoning units. These regulations aren't enforced yet. We expect them to be shortly. Staff are proposing a policy direction which incorporates these proposed directions. So what are we proposing at a high level? A region-wide approach. We talked earlier about that it's a shared initiatives with the other cities in the region. We think it's important to have a consistent approach across the municipalities, one, so that it's easily understandable by our development communities, but also to maintain the relative attractiveness of residential investment across our cities. Again, we're focusing on moderate income households. So when we talk about that, just to put some numbers around it, that's household incomes in that $40,000 to $59,000 sort of dollar range, which is that sort of 30th to 60th income renter household income percentile. We are talking about a consistent framework, but flexibility or reflecting differences across the different major transit station areas. So different markets have different capacities to absorb an inclusionary zoning requirement based on the relative strength of the markets. We've got clarity and flexibility built into the framework from the outset. We're also looking to avoid that market disruption and really looking to establish modest requirements initially and increasing them over time to really address that market disruption idea. It's important that we allow developers, landowners to build some of these requirements into their pro formas. And really crucial is ongoing review and adjustment of these policies. We think this works for a snapshot in time, but it needs to be responsive to what's going on in the housing market. So there are some initial policy and program directions. I'll focus on a few key ones here. Won't go through the whole list, but we're really looking at addressing inclusionary zoning requirements at developments of 50 units or more. That's really to reflect some of the challenges that exist in the economics of developing some of those missing middle forms, like those low-rise apartments. The high-rise towers have economies of scale, and they can more easily address some of these requirements of IZ. Tenure is another crucial one. So there's three kinds of tenure that could happen with an inclusionary zoning unit. One would be an affordable unit in a purpose-built rental building. That's relatively easy to understand. An affordable ownership unit within a condo building. That's relatively easy to understand, I think. And an affordable rental unit within a condo building. So that would be a rental unit within a condo building. Staff are recommending that inclusionary zoning policy really look at the rental approach only because of the forthcoming direction from the province on what affordable ownership would have to look like. The affordable ownership minimum prices that we could require through IZ really don't influence the needs of our community. They'd really only be affordable to the richest 20% of our community, and we don't see a lot of value there. We do, however, see significant value in advancing affordable rental on its own, and because it better hits those needs that we see across the three cities. So the set-aside rates we'll talk about a little bit on the next slide. Maximum rent we'll talk about a little on the next slide. What I wanted to highlight here is a slightly different approach for condo buildings versus purpose-built rental buildings. We know that the market and the development economics for purpose-built rental is more challenging than condominiums as a rule. So the rents that we're proposing to allow in those purpose-built rental buildings are slightly higher than in the condo buildings, and they would align with existing CMHC funding programs. So we see an opportunity to align there. We're looking at eligibility for those low and moderate income households that I talked about on the previous slide. Duration of affordability, really that 25-year is where we'd like to go, and potentially further if we could through partnerships with the third sector. Off-site units is another one. So we think there's an ability for us to meet the affordability goals of this program, but allow some flexibility that could allow developers to provide their off-site units in maybe lower cost building forms like stick-built construction, potentially in lower cost major transit station areas, or potentially align with nonprofit providers. So a nonprofit provider could say, I already own this land, or can you help me own this land? Maybe we can dovetail your project with our project, deliver additional units. Those nonprofits have incentives for lower rents, for longer durations of affordability. They have access to CMHC funding programs that a lot of private developers don't, so we see a lot of value there for the for-profit and nonprofit sector to innovate in the delivery of inclusionary zoning while still maintaining the policy objectives. We see value in administration happening at the city level to secure those units through the development approvals process, but really centralized administration through the region of Waterloo, and builders or nonprofits owning and managing those units in the long term. So when I talk about set-aside rates that are contextually appropriate to the different station areas, here you can see what we're proposing, all within the 5% maximum of the provincial guidelines, and really rolling in slowly over time to allow the market, both developers and landowners, to build this expectations into the pro forma over time. So what are the rents that we're looking at here? We're proposing that in an affordable rental unit in a condominium building, that be tied to average market rent. It's important to note that average market rent is sometimes a confusing term. That's a CMHC term. It really isn't representative of what folks go out and find in the market today when they're looking at new affordable housing units. I'm batting around the term legacy market rent to reflect that those rents are really the ones that are in place today. They represent folks that are in rent-controlled units, old stock that's been there for a long time. Typically, rents in new builds are in the $500 to $700 a month more range, sometimes more neighborhood. Slightly higher permitted rents we talked about for affordable rental in purpose-built rental buildings, and that's to align with the CMHC funding program, but still would be affordable to folks in that low and moderate income bracket. So in conclusion, we think a modest but meaningful number of units are possible with an inclusionary zoning program that we've proposed in the medium term. We think that could ramp up to 27 units per year. Of course, if the market improves and we can turn those dials, that number could be significantly higher. Inclusionary zoning is not a silver bullet. It is needed. It's an exciting new tool that we have that we can sort of hitch onto the wagon of private development and the engine of private development, but it's not a silver bullet. It is needed to complement tools up and down society and all levels of government to invest in affordable housing to try and solve our affordable housing crisis. Again, it targets affordability to moderate income households and a rental housing focus, which is the area where we see the most needs. And it makes an attempt to balance those affordability objectives with the potential impacts on supply. So we know that if a policy is too onerous, it can stifle development and stifle new housing supply. Means that there's no units being built, either affordable or otherwise. If the policy is too lax, we could potentially be leaving affordable units on the table. So we've done our best looking at the financial analysis from NBLC, our consultation with our development partners and industry partners, the nonprofit sector, housing sector, folks that work in that space to find that fine balance. Again, it's a consistent framework across the region, and we've proposed flexible options that work for developers, nonprofits, and tenants to deliver this program. So what are our next steps? We're seeking your direction today to go forward and continue engagement on this work. We think the policy directions that we've put forward I've asked and answered most of the important policy and program questions, but there's still some more work to do. We propose to do that over the summer and early fall, and then return to you for approval on inclusionary zoning bylaw amendment, updates to the official plan, and implementation guidelines. That concludes my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tim. That's great. We will hold questions of staff, but Councillor Schneider, I noted you down. You're good? Okay. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. In that case, we'll move on to our delegations, and I think first up is Don Parker. Welcome, Don. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Of course. Just as a reminder, you'll have 5 minutes to make a presentation.
Yes,
Thank
so I will not delay. I really commend staff in working quickly and collaborating across the region to bring this inclusionary zoning legislation forward now that it's feasible to do so. However, I contest some of the underlying assumptions of their analysis, and I'm speaking against some of their staff recommendations. So under current provincial legislation, as mentioned, we have meager opportunities to require affordable housing units. I recommend that the region and the municipalities fully take advantage of every window that is possible to implement inclusionary zoning. Specifically, implement inclusionary zoning immediately in all MTSAs. It should be applied to builds 10 units and more. I've shared and discussed, and thank you for your time, my proposal to extend the MTSA boundaries in order to create a 500 to 800 meter zone where this innovation can occur. If that's limited to low-rise zoning, it will control land value uplift and allow missing middle builders to outcompete larger developers in the land markets. This is the very important point that isn't in the staff report. And I've been discussing this for years with the region. My understanding is that Statute 36.1.4 of the Planning Act means that inclusionary zoning is not appealable. This is the one place, council, where you still have control. The report demonstrates an incorrect understanding of the value of land value uplift. It states that zoning facilitates affordable housing. The logic is opposite. Land value inflation around station areas works against affordable housing. It incentivizes high-rise, let-them-eat-cake high-rise developments whose construction costs are 2.5 the cost of low to mid-rise, and therefore their rents are naturally higher. Zoning is a tool to control land value uplift. Land value prices will adjust, as discussed in their consulting reports, to affect what can be built on the parcel. So think of land value uplift like a patient with a fever and zoning constraints like Tylenol. So zoning for affordable and low-risk housing in this 500 to 800 meter zone, or wherever you can do it, will reduce land speculation. The report strives to minimize land market disruption. I suggest the opposite. Our land markets, because of the participation and focus from investor actors on the investment value of housing, are not working to supply the needed housing to the community. We know this, we've seen it, we've done the experiment. We need to disrupt these land markets and facilitate the acquisition of land for mid and low-rise, more affordable housing projects, which are naturally more affordable because their construction costs are lower. So the report fails to acknowledge some strategic initiatives under the game theory idea. This incentivizes high-rise builds 501 meters directly outside the MTSAs, and it incentivizes projects coming to council with 48 or 49 units. Obviously, it would be great to have inclusionary zoning across the city. We know that we can't do that right now. I would like to encourage staff, and we've begun these conversations, to incorporate the input of the professors of the School of Planning. I've reached out in writing for 2 years about this issue. I reached out very recently and included conversations or direct communications with staff. My concerns from a land economics perspective have not made it into any of these reports. So I would like to understand how we can better make our voices heard and get our message across. Finally, there are financial models. I encourage the city to make those models public. We're developing similar models. We have the facility with developers, nonprofits to sit down at the table, experiment with the models. We're developing the city's models and have a great evidence-based discussion. So thank you very much for your time and attention on this matter. I'm happy to discuss further at a later date with anyone, continue those conversations.
Thank you, Dawn. There is a question of you from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dawn, for coming in and also for reaching out to us. It's much appreciated. Can you just give us in point form what the recommendations from the School of Pharmacy are? Planning? Sorry.
Well, my recommendations are to implement inclusionary zoning in every MTSA to the fullest extent currently allowed by provincial legislation. My second recommendation is to make sure that you understand and consider any misaligned incentives that your policy proposals might create. My third recommendation, and there might be this opportunity with Bill 97, especially because you're collaborating across the region, is to go back to the region, extend the MTSA boundaries to 500 meters, to 800 meters, sorry, and use that 500 to 800 meter for a low-rise missing middle zone. That's a place where a developer can say, I can't include it in my high-rise, but I will fund it in the low-rise at 501 meters, create housing that is still accessible to transit for moderate income people. So those are 3 points.
Okay, thank you. Just one other thing that I'm pulling this from our conversation earlier this year. You referred to PMSTAs. Can you just speak a bit to that?
Yes, that's directly, and staff can fill you in on this further, but protected MTSAs are ones where inclusionary zoning is implemented. And so MTSAs have been declared. Implementing inclusionary zoning means they're protected. So why is that protected word in there? It's because it gives council control over what development occurs, in my reading. But please consult with your planning staff and with your legal staff. I am not a planning lawyer.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
I think Councillor Chapman got confused about the School of Pharmacy because you were using a medical analogy there. So
Yeah, sorry about that. And I live close.
no,
Yes.
that's okay. Councillor Clancy?
Yeah, I just wanted to see what staff's feedback was, but is that better left to later? till
Yes,
staff?
so if you
Okay,
can just take
I'll
note
leave
of that
till
question,
later.
and then we can go,
Yeah, thank you.
go to staff. Thank you. Mayor Rabinovich?
Thanks, and thanks, Dawn, for coming in and for all of your work on planning stuff and for your work on this. Just to clarify, though, on Councillor Chapman's comment or question, the recommendations you're making are yours, not that of the planning faculty.
No, and always it would be the case that you would consult with individual members of the School of Planning, like Martine August and Brian Doucette. Martine's on mat leave right now. So I'm encouraging you, and Sean Goby, we already have collaborative research agreements that facilitate us helping you answer questions. So this represents my view as a professor in the School of Planning. The School of Planning does not have policy statements.
Okay, great. And just that we have that clarification. And then on the notion of developing and I want to hear from staff on this later, the area between 500 meters and 800 meters and with essentially missing middle. So through your work, and I guess looking at other areas that have done this kind of thing, that can that be fairly transformative, or?
I believe it's a new idea. However, I think that Ottawa has implemented this concept in their official plan. I haven't had the time to look into that. I base this on my understanding of markets. Yes, my understanding of my own neighborhood, which is a missing middle 15-minute city, and the housing market research and the conversations that I've had with developers, especially around this idea of land value uplift. How do we make sure that those missing middle developers can build? And I think there's some alignment with some of the planning staff's recommendations. This particular proposal, as far as I know, is mine, and we did a very large scan of inclusionary zoning last summer as part of a grant development. So it could be an opportunity, if it holds water, again, for Kitchener to continue in its tradition of being a real innovator.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Deneau. I'll take note of it. Councillor Davey? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Parker, for taking the time to bring your recommendations to this committee. I just wanted to ask the question that was part of staff's presentation in terms of your perception of the need for affordable housing versus the broader market need for the housing crisis that we're in. One of staff's assertions is worried about the general supply and in a growing interest rate environment, still escalating actually at this point. Do you have any concerns about developers not being able to meet pro forma for developments and actually hurting the overall supply if we were to maximize every aspect as your proposal is?
Well, we're developing pro forma in my group. We've developed them for rental towers and for condo towers, and the City of Kitchener also has commissioned pro forma for several studies. So that's an empirical question. We have developers ready, eager, and waiting to sit down at the table with us, but we do know that there are missing middle projects coming forward and being approved. There are more developments with 3-bedroom housing units. So these are, and there are projects on the books in my neighborhood, hopefully we'll get through planning. These are cost feasible, but I'm glad you asked this question, because what we also need to consider is nonprofit financing, and obviously the CMHC funding is very important there. A project, 2 points, a project might not be feasible with the 10 to 20% rate of return needed for large-scale construction financing, but it might be feasible 4 to 8% on a nonprofit. But further, when we think about housing supply, we have to remember there are different products. Maybe a tall tower that's very high construction costs isn't feasible, but that stick and beam or tall timber building might be feasible because the construction costs are lower. So one way, what I'm really proposing is that you take your levers and you lever them away from the tall towers, which we know also have environmental problems, and you lever them towards the mid-rise, low-rise, high-intensity builds, which are less expensive. That is the way that we can lower those average rents, in my view.
Okay, that's helpful. And sorry, what in terms of height, what's the highest that you would classify as mid-rise?
Oh,
How many stories?
12.
12 stories.
And again, when we have pro forma, we can sit around, you already hear about many of these parking requirements are so important, getting rid of them or having alternatives. But that's where having those pro forma tools public, the developers want them to be public, the developers want to run scenarios with us, that we're not talking hypotheticals, that we're talking about what could be feasible now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for presenting. Thank you
Thank
for
you
being
so
a
much.
tireless advocate on this issue.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Mary Shorter. Oh, that's written submission. No, it's that was it. Sorry. Just for the, I think, the interest of the committee. So Mary Schroeder and Don Parker, although she delegated, but written submissions were sent to the committee as well. So just take note of that. Okay, so we'll go questions of staff. First up, I guess Councillor Deneau? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the presentation. Oh, there you are. Just a few questions. Is there a risk to expanding the catchment area of the MTSA?
Just keep it on.
Through the chair. So the issue of MTSA boundaries was considered through the regional official plan review. So in August of last year, Regional Council adopted major transit station area boundaries. We brought those proposed boundaries to the previous council. I can't remember exactly when, but to the previous council, not to this one. That's more or less how they rolled out. Those MTSA boundaries were approved by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing in April of this year. So those boundaries are now in full force and effect. The city does not have an opportunity through its official plan to amend them. They need to conform with the ROP boundaries.
Okay. Okay. And so when these units are implemented, how do we monitor, and whose responsibility is it to monitor the people living in those units based on their income?
Yeah, through the chair, we're proposing a monitoring system that leverages the experience of Waterloo Region in administering the community housing program. So there'd be agreements registered on title that say, here's the maximum rent, here's the eligible households. We'll either do a wait list or a lottery sort of approach to say, okay, you qualify for the unit, you can sign a lease, enter it, and there'll be annual reporting requirements year over year. We see a lot of value in the region leveraging its experience in administering social housing in doing that similar role, as well as having sort of economies of scale and consistent approach across the three cities.
Okay, sorry, you said yearly reporting back from the tenants. Does that include a statement of income or wages? Is that how that works?
Through the chair, yeah. The details of the reporting requirements of the unit owner to the city and region have yet to be worked out. I think that annual approach is pretty typical. We have a requirement as a city staff to report back to you as council every 2 years to tell you about how we think the program's going, and update the assessment report every 5 years. That's somewhat different. Obviously, that data will be integrated in that report back to you.
Okay. Another question. I noticed that the condo rents are lower than the purpose-built rental rents. Will the renters of the condominiums, do they pay condo fees, or is that the responsibility of the owner? Is that why they're lower?
So to answer this second question first, we expect that the tenant's responsibility in living in a rented condo would generally be rent and utilities, so property tax, condo fees, etc., would be the responsibility of the unit owner. The reason why it is lower for condos versus purpose-built rentals is the development economics of purpose-built rentals are much more challenging than condominiums. We think there are lots of reasons why purpose-built rental is desirable. So that's why the proposed higher rents, it assists with financial viability. The particular rents that we chose are aligned with the CMHC funding program called MLI Select, which is a powerful way that developers can get preferential financing terms if they include some affordable units.
Okay, and last question, I got time. So I'm looking at the recommended, table number 3 on page 11 of, where are we on here? Or it talks about the percentages of between 24 and 27, 28, 30, 23, 31 and beyond. I'm just curious of the emerging market areas, why this particular area of the MTSAs are waiting until 2028 as opposed to 2024, like the 2 other areas. Was there a reason behind that?
Yeah, through the chair, it was one of the recommendations of our consultants that we set up a framework for weak market areas that had, a low or very low or no set-aside requirement early on, and ramp those up slowly over time so that we can send the signal to the market that these requirements are coming, but not stifle development in the short term where these development performers are generally pretty challenged.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. What exactly are we being asked to vote on here? Or is it just a report for information?
So we're asking council to be directed to engage with the development community, with folks in the housing sector, the community at large on these proposed directions, and bring forth amendments to the official plan, zoning bylaw, and implementation guidelines to you for consideration for approval in December.
Okay. You mentioned policy objectives. Can you just explain the top 3 or 5 policy objections? Like what you actually hope to get out of this? 27 units a year? Is that what we're looking for?
Yeah, through the chair. So we hope that we deliver moderately affordable units above and beyond what we're achieving otherwise. Like I said, it's proposed to be a moderate number of units over year. Year over year, if we deliver, let's say 30 units a year over 10 years, that's sort of 300 households housed affordably that we hadn't had otherwise. So I understand and agree that it looks on its face like a low number, and it is. But we think it's important as one of the tools in the toolkit to deliver affordable units that we're not getting otherwise.
Okay, thank you. I think I need greater clarification to understand why we're modifying the provincial guidelines, which have already been butchered in many ways from the original inclusionary zoning bylaws that were handed down, I think, by the Wynne government, many years ago, and we didn't ever adopt them here at the city. But what we have now in front of us, thanks to Bill 23, is sort of a butchered version of the same, and we're even butchering it further. So I just need greater clarification on why we're doing that.
Councillor Chapman, you said the words that you said, but I would really still appreciate, I guess you rephrase rather than butchering.
Okay, so that we are further decreasing the the guidelines that were originally set out in inclusionary zoning, and further now decreasing the guidelines that have been presented by the Ford government, which I assume they put a lot of work into this, right?
Through the chair, so the original iteration of inclusionary zoning didn't have any limits. It was really a process-based approach to determining what's the appropriate set-aside rate, what's the appropriate depth of affordability, what's the appropriate duration. So we started on that work in 2020 and reported to you sort of what we think the general approach was about the sort of limits and different policy options, what might be viable. There's been a significant transformation in what's gone on in the housing market in the intervening years since 2020. So as you know, construction costs are significantly up, interest rates are significantly up, and it's really changed the dynamics of the pro forma development. So developments that were viable then are not now. In the strongest market areas, 5% probably leaves a few units on the table, but in some of the weaker market areas, 5% would be too much according to our financial analysis. So what we're proposing now for you is a policy that strikes that balance of delivering on affordable housing objectives and the supply question, understanding the market realities as they are today, not as we wish they were or as they were in 2020, with a commitment to frequent monitoring and turning those dials as the markets change to deliver more units as the market's better able to absorb those.
Okay, my last question has to do with your comment about stifling development. Could it not be argued that if we, like inclusionary zoning is region-wide, it's not specific to Kitchener, could it not be argued that even if we were to go with the maximum guidelines set out by the province, that development is not going to be stifled in Kitchener? Are all developers going to move out of the region? I mean, that seems unlikely, right?
Yeah, through the chair, it's a question of, I think, what occurs on the margin. So how many sites that were viable in major transit station areas are no longer viable, or ones that are sort of just scraping by, maybe they've got a return and then don't have a return. So there's a couple ways that could manifest in the opinion of our consultants. So one is folks will relocate outside the major transit station areas, and Professor Parker's identified that possibility as well. They could, not develop in the region. They could, go to Woodstock. They could also go to other cities. They could go to Woolwich. So those are all possibilities. We're trying to strike the right balance that continues to see growth occur along the major transit station areas in the ION corridor, while it's well supported by higher order transit and complete communities.
Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure Guelph would be happy to eat our lunch, but I think we have to be mindful. But just as a clarification, Tim, even if there's holding of development, if the market conditions are not conducive and the threshold is at the maximum, it could also be that the development would be delayed up until the market conditions align. So that affordable housing units may down the road come online, but essentially it will not meet the timeline that's kind of necessary for us. Is that also a concern? Not necessarily that the development would go elsewhere, but it just delayed before it would happen.
To you, Chair, saying yes, I think that's a fair characterization. And it's something that we've heard from the development industry. They expect, or they suggested that might be one approach in response to an overly onerous policy.
Okay. Councillor Clancy.
Yeah, I guess I'm discouraged by the number 27. We don't have a ton of tools right now with the current circumstances, and we know that I think vacancy rate is 0 for affordable housing. Is there an opportunity perhaps for the city to incentivize so that we can have that 5% rate, without stifling supply? Like, I believe through our municipal act, we could look at some capital facilities bylaws and things like that. Like, I'd like to capitalize on that 5% if we can, but maybe there's another way to ensure that we can facilitate that and not hinder supply. Can you speak to that, Mr. Dunigani?
Yeah, through the chair, Councillor Clancy. Yes, one of the issues that we did look at was financial incentives to deliver additional units. The project the proposal that you have before you here is what we call a sustainable approach. So it doesn't rely particularly on incentives above and beyond a couple of those mandatory ones that are under the Planning Act. If council elected to go further, they could deliver additional affordable units, more deeply affordable units, longer duration. They could incent that to happen. And that's one of the items that we would look at and we talked about in the Missing Middle Affordable Housing Report that we talked about in April. So yes, that is possible, not in scope today. And I just wanted to clarify the numbers. We were reporting on 27 units per year. That's according to today's market conditions. So like I said, the market today is really challenging on the interest rate side and the cost side. As market conditions improve, we hope they will, we could turn the dials to increase those numbers. So we're not stuck with 27 units a year forever.
Yeah, I guess I didn't understand because it looked like bachelor apartments had the same rate from condos and purpose-built rentals. Like, the price of it was like $1,400 no matter what condition, where there was more variability. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, through you, Chair Singh, that aligns with the MLI Select program criteria that I talked about from CMHC. So they say the maximum rent for a unit that receives that kind of mortgage insurance is $1,425 a month, irrespective of unit size. So that's where we aligned.
Can you explain a little why the 50-unit minimum? Like, why not a 10-unit minimum? It seems like 5% of 10 is not one, so it's weird to do 1/2. But can you explain why we couldn't lower that? I'm just trying to, I don't want to leave any scrap unaddressed, because I think I hear from people on a regular basis that they're a thread away from homelessness. I know we're trying to, it's death by 1,000 cuts and we're trying to heal by 1,000 cuts, but can you explain the rationale as to why 50 and not 10?
Yeah, through the chair, in doing the financial modeling, the larger sites have a greater ability financially to absorb some of that financial impact. So you may recall from the Missing Middle and Affordable Housing report that we brought to you in April that some of those mid-rise apartments, low-rise multiples, they face a lot of economic challenges that high-rise development simply does not face. So high-rise apartments are better able to absorb that economic impact. We'll never get that 50, sorry, I suspect we don't have that 50 unit number right. I take Ms. Parker's point that we will probably provide some incentives for folks to build 49 unit developments. Seriously, I think we should monitor that carefully and report back to you on what that 50 unit threshold has meant as we operated the first 2 years of the program. But the idea basically is to sort of not add any additional barriers to the development of those missing middle forms.
I guess I would almost, personally, just getting that feedback, this is top of the list for folks in my ward is affordable housing. So if there's a way we could tweak it, even if it's a bit of a rub, toward that need, I think that's our most vulnerable part of our population. So I don't know if there's anything that you could consider and bring back. I know you've put a lot of thought and detail. So it's a very thorough report, and there's so much to process. So it's hard to just pick apart one little bit at a time. But that would be an ask if we could kind of fiddle with that number to make more than 27 a possibility, just given the fact that Dr. Parker shared that type of construction is more affordable, that there might be more of an appetite, that maybe we can reflect back. I don't know. Yeah, thank you. And thank you to the team. I know this was a big body of work. I saw you working evenings at DCC and all through the region, and I know it was extra hours, and there's a lot on the team's plate right now, so I appreciate you putting your time and energy into bringing it to us.
I notice they usually do it in planning. Always the comments end up coming along with it. Always in planning, never in community services or finance. It's always planning. Mayor Vavanovich, I think you wanted to say something. Oh, yes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for taking me out of order. I need to step out for an advocacy call. So I just wanted to just very quickly say thank you to staff for the huge amount of work that's gone into coordinating this, partnering, and bringing this recommendation before us. I probably won't be here when the vote happens, but I'll vote for it. I'll support it next week at council. I think it's at a stage where we now need to go to that next step of community input and engagement so that we can get a final report here. So I just wanted to say thank you before I stepped out.
Thank you. Councillor David.
Yes, thank you. Apologies if it's in the report and I missed it, but do developers in this situation, do they have an opportunity to, like, I think I heard you say that there's an opportunity to partner, like, would they be able to partner off-site locations, number one, and saving that, they have a pure buyout clause amount that they could make to, I guess, any sort of fund or donation that goes to affordable housing that would be the equivalent to building the units within their structure, if that's not their interest?
Yeah, through the chair, off-site units is something that we're proposing for a couple of reasons. We think that there are certain efficiencies of operating a bunch of affordable units in one building rather than multiple buildings. We don't get mixed income buildings necessarily, but we can continue to deliver mixed income communities, which we think is an important part of a complete community. So yes, affordable units off-site is a possibility, and that's what we're recommending. There isn't an ability for cash in lieu paid to the municipality for inclusionary zoning units. There is in some other jurisdictions, not in Ontario. But whatever financial arrangements a developer might want to come to with a nonprofit or even a for-profit partner to deliver those units, provided they meet the criteria of being affordable, being delivered, coincident with the market units, so at the same time as the market units, for that duration of affordability and that depth of affordability, we think that adds value both for developers and for nonprofits.
Yeah, I would agree. Does the location matter? So if they're building a unit next in the MTSA, do the new affordable units have to be also in the MTSA?
Through the chair, according to the provincial legislation, offsite units must be located in an MTSA. We've proposed a fair bit of flexibility and say any MTSA within the same municipality.
That's good.
Okay. And last question, again, and I asked a question of Dr. Parker, and she's down to it. I'm still struggling with the interest rate environment, highest interest rates in 22 years or so. So what is our ability in this? I know we're working with the other governments, but to be responsive if we're either too aggressive or not aggressive enough in the future, how difficult is it for us to change our policy on the fly?
Through the chair, it will be a challenge. There'll be a fairly significant lift by planning staff to do that, but we think it's crucial to a good policy to be responsive and adapted to changes in the market or the regulatory environment. So we'll report back to you every other year. That's our requirement under the Act. And if changes are appropriate at that time, I think staff will bring those forward for a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I won't make comment except to say that there's some great work here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Chapman, you rung back in for your second round. I just have questions, so I'll ask mine first, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you. Some of my questions have been answered. The question about expanding the MTSA boundary, potentially for 500, 800, I understand that it's kind of governed through the OP, and the region has direction on that. Also, through Bill 23, they're looking at bringing potentially planning matters to the lower tier municipality. Once that's fully understood, is that something that we could undertake that on our own at a later time if the full discretion lies with the City of Kitchener? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So the provincial changes and the indications of planning authorities changing between the region and the city, we know that that's under review and we'll have more direction on it. So we intend on updating council once we have additional information and have some preliminary direction. So we don't really have a comment on that at this time.
Okay. That being said, presuming that that never proceeds the way we think it, the intended direction is, could we still not put the request forward to the region and they can make the amendment to the OP?
Through you, Chair, or to you, Chair Singh, I understand the amendments to the Planning Act that are approved but not yet in force. There would be no regional planning authority, so that decision would be ours.
Okay. All right. Additionally, in the kind of the calculations of framework of the condominium development or purpose-built rentals, it's understood that there's more financial complexities, and that's why there's a little bit more of offsetting. It would be the developer's choice if they want to subsidize sale of those units below, so at 80% market value, as opposed to retaining them and continue on with rental units. That would be their discretion, right? In a condo development.
Yes, Chair Singh, it would be their choice whether or not to sell it to a third party, to develop them off units, to retain them themselves. In our consultations with the development community, especially condominium developers, their business model, generally, they need to get off the site and move on to the next project. So whatever program we develop needs to have a pathway for them to do that.
So because that's their intended goal usually, they pretty much want to move away from the site. Is there a way that we can incentivize where there's retention of ownership of those units, or those units are sold to a not-for-profit or community partner? And you're saying that's likely that the direction that they would move?
Yeah, Chair Singh, there are different developers have different motivations, but we've had some interesting conversations with nonprofits about how that could work.
Okay. I'm just looking at ways that we can incentivize additional rental units. So my question is, would we look at that? I think the overall framework of the inclusionary zoning makes sense. I think this is something that I think would probably have an agreement with the other municipalities as well. But is there still time that we can do some additional work where we can tweak the model, where there's look for ways that we can, fasten the development of additional rental units? would we look at this opportunity, or this is the best that you think we can do? Or are there perhaps levers that we could tweak to incentivize more subsidized rental housing?
Yeah, Chair Singh, so the two tenures that we're recommending are affordable rental in a purpose-built rental building and affordable rental in a condo building. So we're not proposing to allow for affordable ownership to meet IZ unit requirements. So in that way, 100% of the IZ units will be affordable rental. I understand your interest in seeing purpose-built rental
Units.
in general.
Yeah.
We tried our best to strike that balance in consultation with some purpose-built rental developers. And we'll continue to have those conversations subject to your direction tonight.
Okay, all right. And that's something that perhaps that we could, members of council and staff in general, through consultation, can look at those options up until the policy would come back later this year, correct?
Correct.
It doesn't have to be through this report. Okay, perfect. Councillor Chapman, go ahead.
Thank you. In the incentive section of the report, it says that it says additional heights and densities for developments and MTSAs should be considered where appropriate. This sounds like bonusing to me. Maybe can you just explain it a bit better?
Through the chair, yes, it does sound a bit like bonusing. So one of the recommendations of our consultant, and we think it's a good one, is to try and integrate the requirement for inclusionary zoning in major transit station areas with updated planning frameworks that allow additional height and density if that's coming. So at the same time, we can negatively impact performance, we could potentially positively impact performance at the same time.
Okay. And I'll have some comments, but I'll try to turn this into a question. We have a development coming to us today at the Schneider site on Cortland, and they are proposing 135 affordable units at the CMHC affordable 80% market value, which is 40% of the units that are being proposed there. This is before inclusionary zoning gets passed. So clearly, it seems to me that developers have this, they're seeing the writing is on the wall, and they're heading in this direction. So I guess my question to you would be, how can we take this example and consider moving in a more rapid way?
Go ahead.
Through you, Chair, and maybe we'll talk about that when the application is in front of committee properly later this evening, but that application is a result of years of negotiating, and part of the negotiation was a higher built form and a higher density. So you will see it when, later today, but there are several towers that they have increased in height since the original application, and that is how they were able to return with some affordable housing units. We also have a plan of subdivision, which is another layer of a development agreement that allows us to secure certain things that are outside of what we would normally do through a site plan process.
Okay, and I think there are other examples that we could look at as well that might have different specs, but okay, thank you.
Okay, can I get a mover on the item? That's all the questions to staff. Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. I'll take comments now. Okay, Councillor Chapman.
I don't need to go first.
You rung in first.
Okay, thank you. So I'm rather disappointed with what we have before us, and I know a lot of work has been put into it in consideration. I would like to ask staff to take it back to the collective and suggest that we do reduce the number of units from 50 to 10, where we implement inclusionary zoning, and also to introduce 5% now. We have an affordable housing crisis, and I don't consider what we're actually calling affordable here affordable, but that's a different topic. But we have over 8,000 people on the affordable housing waiting list, and this list is only going to grow between now and 2031. It's not going to shrink. So, like I said, I think the crisis is now, and I would really like to see staff take take this back to the bigger group and to try to come up with, you know, a plan that that is going to work now for all of those people that are being left behind. So that's my comment and suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Singh. I just want to thank staff for the detailed work in working with this. I know I've been very critical with this file in particular. I'm still very concerned with the way the markets are moving forward. We have interest rates going higher, and it's being stated to go again another quarter point up in July, if not in September. So I'm really concerned that the market's really going to slow down anyways, and we may not see, we'll definitely see a lack of development, in my personal opinion, if we keep seeing that upward trend. But in recognizing those cautionary tone that I had just mentioned, I still think this is still one. I know it's small, but it is a tool in the toolkit. I think it's appropriate that we do start off small in this, because I think there's a lot to learn as we move through this. I know that there's an urgent need, and I think there's other areas where we can be significantly quicker in. But I think in this one, I think we need to take it as it is approach and learn from it and see where it goes, because again, where there's a lot of pressure to that's slowing down development, and I think any more pressure could really have a detrimental effect to the community.
Thank you. Councillor Janelle.
Thank you, Chair. And this is not a comment to staff. This is more just a generality that, when we think of affordable housing, it comes to, it's a very loose term, what affordable housing is. Affordable to me is not the same what affordable to other people around the Horseshoe are. And so my ask has always been if we could change the narrative to geared to income. Because anybody who's a property owner, anybody who owns a home, they bought their home based on their income. They didn't buy their home based on what the market's per se, but they can only afford so much. And so I would love to see the addition of more geared to income, more subsidized housing, as opposed to just fixating on affordable housing. Because I think we could make a bigger dent in geared to income housing than we will necessarily with the affordable housing and with this inclusionary zoning. Not to say that it's not going to work. I just think there's other ways we can address some of our needs that we're failing on some of our community, and that's all.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Deneau covered off the first part I was going to say and did it quite well. I won't reiterate. I just wanted to briefly comment that I 100% agree we're in an affordable housing crisis, but we're also in a market rate housing supply crisis. There are people that have good jobs that can't find a place to live or afford a place to live. So I think we need to be very, very careful about what we do here in really a very, as Councillor Ioannidis mentioned, a very changing interest rate environment that really affects the pro forma of people being able to build. So I'm comfortable with staff's recommendation. They had some professional advice behind it. If I would encourage anything, it would be the ability to be nimble should the market change. Should it become more favorable to develop, then we should be asked for a little bit more. Should it become worse, then the last thing I want to see is us to have a period like we did in the past where there was a decade without any development in our community. I actually don't support, at least this time as well, going below 50 units in terms of affordability. And the simple reason is that is the very definition of missing middle, and the last thing I want to do is provide any disincentive for more missing middle housing in our community. Thank you.
Councillor Clancy.
Yeah, I guess I'm struggling. I think our council has battled what tools we have in our toolbox to use toward affordable housing. And so it's hard when, this tool, I was optimistic about this tool, and then the provincial mandate came, and then the conditions of the market changed. And so, my hope was that inclusionary zoning, of course, wouldn't be the silver bullet, but would go further. I guess, you know, maybe as a councillor, or maybe with staff, we can look into some of those incentives that maybe we haven't utilized as a way to bring more affordable housing online, because I find a lot of projects come our way where, I'm glad it's included later today, but I'm grateful for the planning department for their hard work in trying to make sure that that's part of all projects, but just to feel like as a city we have more tools in our toolbox. So I hope, you know, maybe in the coming months we can look into some of those financial incentives to make sure that we have more affordable housing come online sooner. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about this. I won't lie. I hear Councillor Davies' point about not trying not to stifle the building, because we see lots of approvals come our way, and not always is there a shovel in the ground, right? So mindful of that dynamic. But anyway, yeah. So I'm not sure what to think, but I do appreciate staff's expertise and that you've consulted with the community, consulted with developers, and trying to strike a balance.
Councillor O'Dooney.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure that I do say thank you to staff for putting work into this and providing your thoughts and recommendations around this as well. 27 can be discouraging, just seeing that number, but I do want to make sure that that is acknowledged. Thanks for at least looking at the different tools that are available. I do know as well that I've heard Dr. Dawn on radio several times on Mike Farwell's show, and read some of her articles online, and she sent some things to me as well. If there is just, would like to just request for more collaboration with some of our universities and professors and people that work within that space as well. I think we can probably, if we can collaborate and work together, we can all come up with some really great answers. Nothing against staff or anything in terms of the work that is being done, but I do think that, you know, how do I say that? One can conquer 1,000, but two can conquer tens of thousands. If we can find a way to work together on some of these things, I think we can do a lot more. Thank you very much.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Singh. I want to thank staff for the hard work on this and all those that collaborated with them. I think this, with the factors that we can control, will make a difference. I think we have to be clear on that. We are just one of many levels of government that are working on the affordable housing issue. So with what we can control, I think this is good. And a reminder, it's just a start, and there'll be more good to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's everyone who had keyed in for comments, so I'll just quickly make my own. I agree with the overall sentiment. First of all, that this is a big undertaking from our staff. I think a lot was expected of them to solve overall, I think, the aspects of affordable housing issue within our community. But that's, I think, too much of an ask through one policy, through one framework, and through just inclusionary zoning alone. It is one tool. It is a tool that can be very effective, and I think staff have put forward a framework that I think will be adaptive. We can't get stuck on the 27. It's a low number, but 27 is the predictive number based on the current market conditions. There's staff on hand that measured cranes in our city. I mean, we used to have 15 just a couple of years ago. Now it's maybe 3 or 4. That's about it. It's reflective of what the market is dealing with right now. If we had development proceeding with the same pace as it was a few years ago, guess what? Even on the numbers that staff have outlined through this report, it wouldn't be 27. It would be a multiple of that. So we have to be realizing of the fact that that low number is based on the market conditions, and those market conditions will change. I think our community will continue to grow. And more importantly, staff have said that depending on the market conditions, if they become favorable, we can tweak up that number of the inclusionary zoning requirement. That's within our capacity to make sure we mandate more of those affordable housing units coming online. Forcing a more restrictive higher number out of principle achieves only that, principles. it doesn't achieve real results. I'm hoping the policy, the way it's being put forward, will continue on being tweaked to improve upon. I'm hoping that we can somehow incentivize and create more rental housing units. That's really where affordable housing starts. It's in rental. Ownership is important, but it's in rental, especially in the lower tier. So I'm hoping staff will continue to work to see if there are other avenues that we can incentivize to fasten the pace of that type of development. But beyond that, I think this is a first and important step forward, and we can continue to improve upon that. With that, the item has been moved by Councillor Ioannidis. All those in favor? Oh, recorded vote, sorry. Okay, that carries everyone's support except one. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item. And thank you once more to staff. Okay, 6 point. No, that's okay. That's okay. So we'll move on to 6.2. That's growing together. It's the engagement summary report overview. Just for the interest of the committee, that we have received a written submission from M. Nichols, I believe. So just please be mindful of that. Okay, other than that, Ms. Goss, I think you will be presenting. Oh, no? Okay. Is it on? Key back in. Go ahead. Andrew, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So we are here today to present the Growing Together Workshop Engagement Summary and to speak to our next steps in the Growing Together project. We have a little video to play. I don't know if you can help me out with this. I'd appreciate that. So major transit station areas have unique provincial and regional policies, and intensification around transit is a core fundamental principle of Ontario's planning structure. The city has launched the Growing Together project to implement these policies by updating the city's planning framework in our MTSAs, including official plan policies and zoning bylaw regulations. Growing Together is the continuation of the ongoing planning review process that began with the planning around rapid transit stations, or PARTS work, and has advanced through the Neighborhood Planning Review, or NPR project. Through a series of hands-on workshops, we engaged with the community to develop scenarios for growth. Participants were asked to place an additional 18,000 housing units on the model of our MTSAs, represented by low, mid, and high-rise building typologies that were printed in bright yellow. These units align with Kitchener's Housing Pledge target. They're in realistic forms that we are seeing built today, but they are also in forms that align with our missing middle and affordable housing study typologies that were developed through that report. While working through this exercise, participants discussed what their thought process was for where they placed different building types so that we could better understand their priorities. And it was important that staff meaningfully engage with the community to explore these very complex challenges that we're faced with. An interactive workshop format was chosen to ensure that this engagement was accessible to as many people as possible, that it represented realistic parameters for future change, and that it led to community feedback that is implementable within the current land use planning process. So the Growing Together workshop format was intentionally designed to be equitable, educational, and measurable. Those were our pillars. Those were what we set out to do. The Digital Kitchener Innovation Lab and city planning staff collaborated to develop a geographically accurate 3D printed model of Kitchener's MTSAs with existing buildings accurately represented at a 1 to 1,000 scale. Staff have also created a complementary smart digital model of the same area, enabling each workshop scenario to be translated into an identical digital model where we can generate a wealth of information on density, housing, people and job targets, parking, and more. We're able to use these tools to translate the community-created scenarios into quantifiable results that we can analyze. So this approach has won 2 awards to date, including a top 3 finish at the International Smart 50 Awards, which is the highest award given at the Smart Cities Connect conference. Growing Together has also won an Excellence in Municipal Systems Award by MISA Ontario. So this summary that was included includes analysis of our 6 public workshops specifically, and that represents over 33 hours of consultation held. Over 10,000 residents of the Growing Together MTSAs were notified by mail of the workshop events. 562 members of the community participated in our workshops. For those interested in going into greater depth about a particular issue, staff also prepared a card deck of 24 visualized facts on growth, development, and housing as well. We set out to make engagement meaningful and enjoyable for our community members. The goal for the engagement process was to be inclusive, equity-informed, and data-driven. This included going to where people are by hosting public workshops at libraries, community centers, and the market. Staff also provided a range of dates and times to people. To reach people who have limited availability, we offered daytime, evening, and weekend workshop times to help better accommodate community needs. Our targeted workshops mailed out postcards to residents of low, medium, and high-rise housing, which also helped us hear from a broader range of community perspectives. As we can see in the engagement summary itself, all of these unique groups came to very broadly similar conclusions about how to distribute growth and change. The workshop itself was designed to be interactive and fun. Our intent was to be non-traditional with this engagement. We wanted to show people that, that participating in civic processes can be both fun but also meaningful as well. So there were several consistent themes across the workshops, and these are our key findings. Staff and our engagement consultant heard broad support for growth and intensification within MTSAs, with priorities being for walkable, vibrant, transit-oriented, complete communities. We heard that additional parkland needs to be considered as the city grows. Many participants stated their concern for housing affordability and access to a variety of housing styles and types. And many participants noted the importance of community infrastructure keeping pace with the growth that we're seeing, particularly schools, hospitals, grocery stores, and other things of that nature. So on the right of this slide is a map that shows where all buildings were placed by all 562 workshop participants across all 6 public workshops. Staff are using this map and other outputs from the workshops to inform Growing Together moving forward. And finally, our next steps. So already staff have used the workshop analysis to inform a preliminary approach to an updated planning framework, and that will be published on our Engage page by the end of this month. These draft materials have also been informed by the Housing Pledge, the Missing Middle and Affordable Housing Study, and the Inclusionary Zoning Project. So over the summer, we are continuing to engage with the community and other stakeholders on this draft approach, starting with a presence on Galco Street this Saturday as part of Kitchener-Waterloo Multicultural Festival. A list of currently scheduled engagement opportunities is posted on the Engage page as well at engagewr.ca/growingtogether. Final draft materials, including official plan policies and detailed zoning regulations, will be published in early September of this year. At this time, we expect Growing Together to be presented to Council for a decision by the end of this year. And that concludes our presentation. The Growing Together staff is available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Before we go to questions of staff, we'll first listen to our delegation. Steve Burrows. Steve, you have 5 minutes to present when you're ready.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. I have a presentation that should be there.
I'll look to our clerks.
Someone, I only have 3 minutes here.
And also, if you can lessen the volume a little bit, I think we'll hear a little more clearly doing so.
Okay. All right, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight.
Steve, one second. You said you have a presentation as well?
I see it here now.
Oh, this is it? Okay, this is yours. Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I got the opportunity to participate in this process, and I have to say I appreciate the scale and complexity of pulling something like this off. I can say that it was a lot of fun for residents to take part in and actually envisaging how the city might grow and where they might put buildings. However, I think with such a big emphasis placed on housing units, as in the number of units that are going to be built, at this early stage, I want to start the discussion around all the other things that make up complete communities, things like institutional space, municipal areas, parkland, dog park, social, soccer fields. These things I found to be really lacking in the report. My primary focus would be on parkland, though. I'd like to understand what information was provided, sort of background information was provided with when this was happening. Looking at the cards that was produced, sorry, advance the slide. Looking at the cards that were produced, and this is just a random selection, it was what was available, I think they really need to be revisited, potentially revised, and this is a general statement. I've heard from a number of people that they didn't really fully appreciate what the purpose of these cards was. You know, if I look at the first one, for instance, they're pulling information from Toronto. Maybe the consultant doesn't realize that the City of Kitchener had a third-party report produced last year that gives City of Kitchener numbers, and they're quite different. And I'd like to understand if people understood, you know, not just the cost, how it breaks down, but things like what we've heard earlier, that lower forms of housing are actually more affordable than high-rise. Maybe that's something that could be addressed. With the second card, we're looking at impacts of household energy. And again here, I think it's important to understand what this is representing. The top line, well, firstly, these are reversed. So the left-hand information is actually transportation and not household energy use. So if we're looking at the energy that's used, the top one represents 30,000 kilometers of driving, the middle is 20,000, the lower one is 10,000, and likewise, the top one is 3 people living in a unit, middle is 2 people, bottom one is 1. And when you do the math, actually the lower unit, the apartment, is actually the worst performing in terms of energy use. The third one, we're looking at transportation. Again, I think some more information about what the intent behind this is, and potentially more background. You know, transportation will be broken down into things like agriculture or goods and services. And you know, maybe this leads to us looking at providing more housing closer to where people shop or closer to where people get their fresh fruits and vegetables. The fourth one here, I don't know that I fully understand. But if that top image is meant to be an apartment building, like the image to the right, if it represents 500 units, below that wouldn't be 500 housing units. And again, if the suggestion with this, and again, I don't know if I fully understand it, if the suggestion is that people in houses don't use public transit, I don't know that that's fully accurate. I mean, I don't really understand the purpose or how it breaks down. The fifth one is interesting because it shows the area that would be consumed by 500 houses relative to 1 condo. And that area that's shown there is actually 1/3 the size of the UGC. And you can imagine that if you were to place that 1 condo inside that unit and multiply it, the amount of density you'd get, and I mean, you'd certainly run into some traffic issues if we're looking at the card before. And I can see that that's really what's happening. But my focus, again, I guess, is going to be primarily on parkland. Next slide, please. So I want to look at 2 areas. The first area is going to be, next slide, please. The first area is the UGC, and this is sort of broadly represented with the gray area of downtown. I think many of us understand where that is. And, you know, it's, in this instance, it's quite densely packed. And as I've been saying, I want to focus on parkland. And currently, today, well, as in 2020, the downtown area was at a deficit of about 40 acres of parkland to get to par at 4 square meters per person. And, you know, and that's just going to go up as we increase the density. Next slide, please. Whereas this area here, near Fairview Mall, Fairview Park, you can see how there's a lot more parkland, and you can see that the area represented, these are the same scale, the area represented is actually very similar to the UGC. Next slide, please. As I talk about these things, I'm really approaching this from a position of equity. I keep hearing the term equity throughout these presentations, and trying to achieve a 15-minute city. Next slide, please.
Steve, if you can start wrapping up, please. I just gave you a little extra time. Go ahead.
Extra time, okay. So the UGC actually is, I live there now, and I can say it is a 15-minute city. You know, you can access pretty much everything you want, and you know, other than some things, and one of the things, again, we're lacking is the recreation space. Next slide. So if you look at this slide, it's just an image of the downtown. You can see there's not a lot of space for the infrastructure that goes in. You know, sidewalks are quite narrow once we start to get this area populated. And I have to say, you know, the new population we've seen has been great. It is getting livelier. You can see the park is you know, is busy all the time. I mean, these things are great. Next slide, please. here you can see that, if we're going to consider this from the perspective of a 15-minute city, that, you have access to a lot of parkland. You have access to things like to grocery stores, the mall, everything you want there, Walmart. So there's a lot more, things are a lot closer in that instance. I've been driving a lot back and forth to Chicopee these days because I've been riding my bike by the river, which is great. But again, I have to drive to get there. And, that's, I don't think, quite what we want to achieve. If you look at the left-hand side in the middle, you'll see 4 apartment buildings. You can see how if you place those apartment buildings, you could actually accommodate the 36 towers that, they're looking to achieve all within this one MTSA. So I'm just kind of wondering why this MTSA wasn't considered. Next slide, please.
Okay, no, Steve, you're about 8 minutes in.
Two slides, 2 comments.
Okay,
so,
very quickly.
So here, I just want to show, when you compare this to the downtown, the amount of space that's available for development. The next slide, that's Fairview. Next slide is Blockline. You can just see how, there's lots of space here for development to occur, which would intensify the MTSA as the goal. I'm questioning why we haven't looked at this. That's it. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for your lenience. Appreciate it.
Of course. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, for coming in. I guess it's a compound question. How do you connect this to the growing together? Like when you talk about Parkland, you talk about the 15-minute city. How are you tying this back into the whole growing together project that we're dealing with here?
Interesting question, and I didn't initially appreciate, I think, that the growing together process is really about setting the new official plan and zoning bylaws. This is the framework that's going to be set up from this exercise, and looking at complete communities. I think as the planning process progresses, we need to be starting to think about parkland, about our infrastructure, about what's available to people. And what I saw in the current draft, I didn't see any of that being presented. And I wonder, if people were understanding as they're placing these buildings that along with that building, each 40-story tower, say, requires an acre of parkland if you want to meet the 4 square meters. So would people understand that as they place that tower in the UGC, they also have to place an acre of parkland somehow?
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I think it does. Thank you.
Councillor Clancy, go ahead.
Yeah, I assume you're in the downtown, just from your comments, but can you share about the impact of the lack of park space that you experience?
So, of course, everybody wants to see more parkland in their neighborhoods. But I think the downtown in particular, at 0.1 square meters of parkland per person is severely deficient, especially if we're considering that the downtown is or all the MTSAs are or will be the majority of rental units, even probably the majority of the population. I think it's important that we provide the space for the people, and if the city really intends on accommodating 4 square meters per person, just to get to par, as in 4 meters per square meters per person at 2020, that's about $1 billion in terms of taxes that would need to be spent in land acquisition. And as a homeowner and taxpayer, that's significant. If council were to increase taxes by the same amount as last year, use all that money for parkland, it'd be 60 years before they could do that. And that's not considering the 20,000 units or 18,000 units they plan on adding. And that would be another $1 billion. So I think it's significant. I think somebody needs to start looking at this because, the downtown is short. You can start to see now Victoria Park is always packed, which is great. But people are really running out of space to go.
All right, Councillor Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Excuse me. I just have a quick question. So, and correct me if I'm wrong. Based on your presentation, are you saying that there's too much development that's going to be happening town within that perimeter of where, you know, everybody kind of put the towers and the multi-levels? And would you rather see it moved out towards like Hidden Valley where there is green space? Is that what you're advocating for? I'm just curious.
I don't think it's a one or the other thing. I think it needs to be looked at in terms of how the growth in the city is done. I guess I would say I don't think it's appropriate that all the development that happens in the core is, you know, 50-story towers, 40-story towers, especially when you consider that the infrastructure is really lacking, especially in terms of parkland. So not to say it shouldn't be happening here. I think we need to start looking at, you know, potentially different forms of housing in different areas. And yes, looking at different areas where housing can be built in, you know, super high density, but housing can be built. I mean, the area I showed, it is an MTSA. It's right on the LRT. It's also connected directly to the expressway. You know, if somebody was commuting to Cambridge or wherever they might commute to, it's easy access. So you're actually taking cars out of the downtown, which would be good. I mean, I think people need options.
Okay, thank you. Steve, sorry, I asked this question because I think there may already be an agreement, but I just want to get a confirmation from you to understand if you're coming from it the same way as I see it. You said that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Are you envisioning greater level of density across the city that may be low-rise, kind of encapsulating the missing middle that we haven't seen outside of the MTSA boundaries or the downtown core, while at the same time allowing obviously the highest level of density in our core, but offsetting that density demand immediately all in the core now, whereas we can kind of augment some of that happening outside the downtown or the MTSA boundaries?
I mean, I think if somebody starts to look at how, and this is just to get to par at 2020, to provide at the population as of 2020, which we all know it's gone up, more buildings are under construction and approved already. If we're looking at 2020, if somebody's going to look to find 40 acres of land to dedicate as parkland in the downtown, that might start to answer the questions.
Okay, all right. Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks.
We'll move on to questions of staff. Councillor Chapman.
Okay, thank you. I guess my first question would have to do with the feedback from the community. So I shared the Growing Together cards with a number of different neighbourhood associations because I thought it was important for them to sort of look at them, and Steve was one of the team members on that exercise. And they submitted quite a detailed account of just the cards. And I know they also provided feedback to the board exercise that they did. So I was just wondering how that factored into this report we have here today.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the feedback that we received was put together into that analysis, all combined. The engagement summary that's before you lists all of the feedback that we did hear. We have the key messages in that work. We have the analysis of all of the exercises themselves. We heard a variety of opinions from a variety of different people, and what we have today in this summary is a sort of consolidation of that feedback. And we did hear broad support for the exercise, for the way that it was run, how it allowed people to directly visualize themselves or the future of the City of Kitchener, how it helped to understand the amount of growth that we are required and need to plan for moving forward. But of course, not everyone is completely in consensus.
And regarding parkland, that was not part of the exercise in any way. And I know Places and Spaces is yet to happen, but is there an opportunity to work to combine the two, like rather than thinking them as separate projects? Because as we develop, if we leave the parkland till later, we won't have the land to turn into parkland.
So through Mr. Chair, yes, we are collaborating with our parks colleagues on their Places and Spaces project. We speak to them frequently and are back and forth in our collaboration with respect to how we handle growth and how we provide for parkland for our citizens. That is something that we hope to continue to do, but that is a process that they have been in front of council with Places and Spaces. I believe they've delivered the Spaces portion of that work to council and are currently working on the Places portion.
And what's the timing of the new zoning bylaws in the MTSA areas and the Places and Spaces parkland acquisition or creation report that we should expect to receive at some time?
So before you carry on, I think just your previous question, Councillor Chapman, Mr. Reedman, do you want to elaborate more or try to add something additional?
Yeah, through the chair. And so the intent of this first phase of exercise specifically focused on the 7 MTSAs in the west area of Kitchener. We anticipate 18,000 of the 35,000 units from the pledge to be allocated to that area. And so that's what those buildings actually emulated, and they included a variety of low-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise buildings. They're the types that we are seeing being constructed within those MTSAs, and so we want to have a realistic estimate. The other reason why we didn't include parkland in that exercise is we really wanted to test where the community felt it was more appropriate to place some of those high-rise, mid-rise, and low-rise buildings. And so this isn't necessarily saying that's exactly where they're going, but it's for us to really help understand in this first phase where high-rise is more expected to happen in those MTSAs based on community feedback. And so this is only one exercise and one tool in a greater planning exercise that's happening right now.
So can I just ask you a question? Do I still have time? Okay.
Yeah, you have time.
So you mentioned that was an exercise to determine where one might position the 18,000 units to get us closer to our 35,000 unit pledge. I understand there are 20,000 units that have not yet been built that we already have in the pipeline that have already been approved. So plus, and that was in May or March of 2022. And since then, we've approved quite a few, many more, which probably brings us up to at least, I'm guessing, 25,000. So I'm not quite sure where this 18,000 fits in. Is that above and beyond the 30,000 or 35,000?
But in fairness, Councillor Chapman, of the many approved are already within that that boundary. But go ahead, Mr. Reedman.
Yeah, through the chair, planning approval isn't the same as occupancy, and so part of the pledge is 35,000 occupied units within the next 8 years. And so we know that we're a growing community and one that's desirable to live in. We have a strong economy and we have amenities that are supportive for community members. And so the pledge is just one thing, is an estimate, but we are planning overall the region for growth, and it goes much beyond the 8 years that we're talking about right now.
Okay, and I forget what my earlier question was, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, I don't see anyone else. Can I get a mover on the item? Councillor Owaduni. And comments? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I mean, the way the recommendation is worded, I'm happy to support it. But I do have a few concerns with the way the exercise has been conducted, and in particular, the fact that Parkland was not part of the whole project, because I think this is, especially in the downtown core, where we know we have a huge deficit going forward. That part was is a serious concern to me, and I know to many of the residents in the downtown. I also found it difficult, me personally. Maybe I have certain challenges, I'm not sure, but important information that would have made the exercise more useful to me is knowing the current zoning of the properties, both surrounding where these little figures were being put, understanding more the zoning that's already in place, having more to scale the buildings that are in place or proposals that were already in the works at that time, sustainability questions, affordability. Like I found it very difficult to imagine where I would put a resin tower without having that information. So maybe others found it easier, but it's just an observation that I wanted to make known. So thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Singh. I just want to, first of all, thank staff for putting this all together. I mean, we had a significant amount of engagement. I think it was probably, it was very an innovative process. I happened to be in one of those at the market, and the amount of engagement that I saw there was quite significant. And I think we're losing the true thought of what this exercise was and what this report is. It was to visualize where the growth could be and to visualize it on a grand scale, that where you can't visualize it by just by talking about it in numbers. And I think this gave it a little bit of life, and was, you know, especially to residents who do not understand all the policies and the processes and everything else, to give them a better understanding. So, I mean, being critical of the engagement, I think, is a little off base. I think it was an incredible amount of engagement. I mean, I'm not saying this is perfect as far as a report. I think, I'm not sure if Councillor Schneider is bringing something forward, but I really feel like the missing middle, I know staff will have some comments later about that, but I feel like the missing middle is something that, and I know Councillor Singh had mentioned it offhandedly, the growth of our city. I mean, we need a good balancing act, and I really believe the missing middle is where we need to be looking at, and you know, would definitely offshoot some of the high density. Anyways, I approve where this is going. I feel like it was very engaging, and I feel like, and in the cards in general, I mean, those are stats. So, I mean, to be critical of stats, this is the world we're coming to now. It's kind of mind-boggling to me. So, anyways, I'm looking forward to passing this.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. My comments are never offhanded. Creative, yes, but never offhanded. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Singh, and I wanted to echo some of Councillor Ioannidis' comments as well. I found it incredibly engaging. In fact, I loved the opportunity to go around and place things, look at the different topographies in the area and see where things would best fit. And in fact, after doing that, I said that I would love every single one of our applications that comes to council. I would love to see a representation like that as well, because you know what, it made it real. And instead of just saying, oh, this is, you know, a 40-story building, etc., this is actually what it looks like, and here's what it's going to do in the neighborhood. Here's what's next to it. Here's and I actually thought it was really, really good. I would love to see more of that, and I can't remember if I read it in the report or not, but I believe it won some kind of an award or something for its innovation. So more of that, and kudos to our planning team for making development real to people. So kudos to you, and I will be voting in favor of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Dooney.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do want to say a big thank you to you for this. I remember the day we went through the engagements. I think I'd landed the day before, so I was going through jet lag half of the time, half asleep. But it was a really engaging process, and it gave me a visual 3D view. And I know I had some questions, and we had some conversations, and there were some areas where we had some discussions around the table, which I thought was great. I'm really, I really love the part that we engaged the community, because like Councillor Johnston mentioned, it didn't just become councillors' thing or just what the city does. This was an opportunity for participants and members of the community to be a part of this conversation and see some of the concerns that come with it. as well. So I do want to say a big thank you for that. I really love reading this key takeaways from workshop members. I think it gives them an idea of some of the concerns and things that we go through as well, and give them an opportunity to see things from our perspective as well. So thank you for this. This was innovative. This was different for me. Kept me awake that day. I am in full support of this. So thank you very much. Well done.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Singh. I echo the thanks given to staff and to all the engagement participants. It was great. It's very innovative and unique form of engagement, and it was done throughout the city in different parts of the city. So we're getting a good overall view, and I agree with the takeaways that Councillor Owaduni mentioned. I do want to say, though, I'm happy for this work and hoping that there's more missing middle permissions starting outside of the MTSAs in the future, and look forward to seeing what happens with that in the official plan review, because missing middle is definitely an important part of our housing continuum.
Thank you. Mayor Vavanovich.
Thanks. Just very quickly, thank you to staff for the work that went into this. You know, it's often, I think, would have been so much easier to sort of do a report, do a few, I was going to say Bristol boards, but cardboards or foam boards rather, and have a conversation that way. But this was so engaging, and watching people, and particularly the market one, where we saw, you know, parents and their kids, you know, and mom and dad would put a building in one place, and then the kid would go and move it somewhere else, and just sort of seeing the different views and the different perspectives of people at different stages in their life, and what they'd like to see it look like was kind of cool. It was, you know, in my mind, it was sort of like SimCity, the old-fashioned way, where you actually had little buildings and were able to place things and get some really good feedback in terms of how this process is going to develop going forward. So, kudos to the team for coming up with this approach.
Thank you. That's everyone. I'll just make a couple comments on my own. I agree with you absolutely. It really did bring SimCity to life. It was an interactive, innovative approach where it put, I think, the direction of how our residents want to see our city grow up in the hands of our residents. As opposed to our staff telling what's good for you, they told us how they would like to see our city adaptively grow within a significantly invested area, and of course in a transit supported area as well. More importantly, the way I see this is it's not about, you know, the 30,000 households that have, units that have to be built out. It's how our city will look in the next 20 to 30 years from now. Because it's not just the 18,000. It shows this area can support this level of density and beyond. And at the same time, it outlines in full clarity on people how that development will proceed in our downtown core and the MTSAs. Far too often, our residents come forward and say, hey, wait a minute, what's getting built in my backyard? I had no idea. This negates that argument completely. Our residents have full understanding going forward how our downtown core and our MTSA areas will continue to densify and grow in a sensitive way, while at the same time ensuring that we build the necessary infrastructure to support those new residents as well. With that, the motion has been moved by Councillor Owaduni. With that, all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. This takes care of the first part of the planning and strategic initiative. No, there's one more. Oh, there is one more. Yes, there's one more. There's a lot more. This was supposed to end 6:30, by the way. So, no, I'm seeing. Yeah, no, I'm saying there's a lot more in the later items as well. Okay. Sorry, for 100 New Dundee Road. And Katie, I believe you are presenting first. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Certainly. Good evening.
I know it says that you have 10 minutes, but if you can try to shorten it the best you can.
I will be as quick as I
Okay.
can.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. Through the chair, good evening. Here to speak to recommendations before you for a proposed zoning bylaw amendment and plan of subdivision for a property at 1000 New Dundee Road. This parcel is in the Dune South community. It has can be effectively split into two halves. The section closest to Dodge Drive contains Blair Creek and
Kitty, I
associated.
hope you don't mind. I'm interrupting you, but I am required to read out. I think it's important I read it out before you begin the presentation as opposed to me reading it out afterwards. So this is a public hearing matter under the Planning Act as advertised. And this is a formal public meeting to consider applications under the Planning Act if a person or public body does not make oral written submissions to the City of Kitchener before the proposed applications are considered. The person or public body may not be entitled to appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal and may not be added as a party to a hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal. With that, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. So the property can effectively be split into two halves. The Blair Creek and associated wetlands is closest to Dodge Drive, and the agricultural field located next to New Dundee Road. And you can see this is an excerpt from our official plan. The natural lands are designated natural heritage conservation. The agricultural field is designated low-rise residential. So the applicant is proposing to rezone the property from what is now a future use zone, and the purpose of that zone is recognizing that additional studies, additional work need to be done before development zones and other zones can be put in place. So the applicant's proposing a Res 5 zone to permit a 127-unit townhouse development on the lands closest to New Dundee Road, with a special regulation provision to permit a floor space of 0.75, a height of 14 meters, and to allow ground floor units without a patio and with reduced setbacks to porches and stairs, primarily for the design of the units fronting onto New Dundee Road. We're also proposing a holding provision to require confirmation or availability of services. This lot is not currently serviced, and that's going to be one of the requirements of the plan of subdivision and prior to site plan control. And then, of course, the lands closest to New Dundee Road are proposed to be zoned natural heritage conservation, and that would apply to those lands, as well as a 30-meter buffer that extends into the field that will be naturalized and planted with buffer plantings. And that's based on the recommendations of an environmental impact study. So together with the zoning bylaw amendment is a plan of subdivision. Unlike some subdivisions, this does not contain new municipal roads, parks, infrastructure. It creates two large parcels. One is the open space Blair Creek wetlands to be dedicated to the City of Kitchener as open space for long-term protection. Not only is it a city environmental feature, it's a core environmental feature at the regional level. It contains PSW. So it's appropriate for it to come into public ownership for long-term preservation and protection. And then the multiple residential parcel located next to New Dundee Road is the developable lands. And as the next step, there would be a couple of additional processes, a site plan, which would lay out the townhouse units. So this is the development concept. You can see the townhouses located on private roads in the property. There's a large amenity space that would have a playground feature, as well as a private stormwater pond and amenity space adjacent to it. And together with this, there would be a common elements condo. So that's just how the property would be further split up for ownership purposes through the common elements and then ownership of the parcels. So this application increases missing middle housing, 127-unit cluster townhouses, conveys a section of Blair Creek in the wetlands to public ownership, and the bylaw implements the official plan designations that are already in place. So we recommend that the applications be approved. We are of the opinion that the zoning bylaw is consistent with the policies of the provincial policy statement, conforms to the growth plan, the regional official plan, and the city's official plan, and represents good planning, and that the proposed draft plan represents proper and orderly development. In the city, it considers the criteria of the Planning Act for the subdivision of land. And that is all for my presentation.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll go on to our delegations. First of all, we have Stephanie Metviva. Stephanie, whenever you're ready,
Thank you.
you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of committee. So my name is Stephanie Matviva. I'm with Glenn Schnarr & Associates, the registered agent on behalf of the property owner. If I could have the next slide, please. So just quickly to build on Katie's presentation. So again, the property that we're looking at tonight is 1000 New Dundee Road, outlined in red here. So it's a continuation of the existing community. If I could have the next slide, please. So again, just quickly, this is the draft plan of subdivision. The intention is to essentially subdivide the property into 2 blocks. Block 1 being closest to New Dundee Road is the area where development is to occur. Block 2 to the north, which is a natural heritage system block, is to be conveyed to the city and is to maintain the natural features and the applicable buffers to maintain the long-term health and protection of the natural features. If I could have the next slide, please. So just very quickly, this is a copy of the conceptual site plan. The area that is to be redeveloped is comprised of different townhouses. So there is a mixture of street-oriented townhouses as well as rear lane townhouses. There's a proposed park block, private park in the middle of the area, as well as a stormwater management pond to the very right of the site plan. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, again, so there's a total of 127 units. Of these, 27 units are the rear lane townhouse type. The remaining 100 are to be the street-oriented townhouse. In total, there's 150 parking spaces to be provided, including 23 visitor spaces. There's also 40 bicycle parking spaces to be provided. On the left, there's just a precedent image of what that private amenity space could potentially look like. If I could have the next slide. And finally, this is just a rendering to illustrate some of the natural areas. So there's a number of green and landscaped open spaces. Again, that central area is to be provided as private amenity area. The programming will be considered as part of future applications. And again, just a breakdown of the types of units that are to be provided. Happy to, finally, we have read the staff report and we are in agreement with the proposed recommended conditions. I also have the property owner on the line in case there are any questions. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be. Thank you.
Stephanie, would that be Jesse that you have online with you?
Correct.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Councillor Michaud?
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. This is it's a great development you're putting out there on New Dundee Road. I met with I think you, Stephanie, and someone else from the group, and took a walk through on this. I have one concern with regards to the only one entrance for 127 units and on New Dundee Road. So I can't picture how the traffic flow in and out of one entrance with that. Many congested properties in that area. I'm wondering if is it possible to have 2 entrances, one on either side?
That is certainly something that can be further considered as part of the future detailed design stage. I would also just highlight that a transportation impact study has been provided as part of this application. And so that reviewed the overall site design as well as the traffic patterns. And it was found to be appropriate.
The one entrance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I would just like to note that I think it would be a better development, and with 150 cars coming in and out, I think 2 entrances would be a little safer on New Dundee Road.
So, Councillor Michaud, I think this is something that could be potentially addressed through the site plan review process, and you can key back in to ask that question or make that kind of your comment to staff. Once we're done with the delegation.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, thanks.
Which we are. That's all. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
So now, questions of staff. Go ahead.
Yes. So now I'll ask you, Katie, the possibility of having another entrance on that road. I mean, I know New Dundee's road's going to change, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but it does seem like an awful lot of traffic coming in and out of there.
So through the chair, a transportation impact study was completed, and because it's a regional road, it was to their satisfaction. Because of the curvature in the road, I believe that they're recommending that only one access, and that's the preferred spot, just because of the visibility around the curve and that sort of thing to maintain safety. They didn't raise any concerns, didn't require any. I don't believe there's any improvements required to the road geometry, but that's certainly something that they would finalize, and there's a condition in here that is the final approval of the TIS, and then implementation of anything through the next detailed stage. There is a secondary access for emergency purposes, just because of the distance between, of the length of all those internal driveways, just in case there is a blockage or something of one. That way fire vehicles or other emergency vehicles do have a second way into the site. So there's certainly two accesses for that purpose.
That's great, thank you. I think the development it's a really nice area. That's great, thanks.
Councillor Clancy.
Yeah, thank you so much. It does look lovely, and I'm glad the wetland is going to be protected. I just have a question. I noticed a phrase, no transit plans for this vicinity. I know I've heard so many students say that Conestoga is really lacking in accommodations, and it's really close, I think. I don't know, Councillor Michaud, I know New Dundee Road extends right to Conestoga. Is there a way we can collaborate with the region? There's no sidewalks, there's no ability to safely ride your bike. It's a really fast and busy road, and then no transit planned. I guess I'm concerned that we have this gap right down the road. How do we negotiate with the region to facilitate better ability to live places without needing cars?
Yeah. So through the chair, as is part of the city's continuing to urbanize, the region's continually evaluating not only transit but the roads. They do have a couple of improvement projects planned over the next number of years, some roundabout improvements that incorporate things like bike lanes, pedestrian facilities. The section of New Dundee between Robert Ferry and New Dundee Road is also planned for improvements in a couple of years, and the city's continually advocating for inclusion of cycle lanes, sidewalks. So this area, I mean, up until a decade ago, it was very, very rural, and so it's sort of continually growing and changing, and those improvements are being made through various regional projects. With respect specifically to transit routes, the nearest route right now is, I believe it goes down New Dundee and up Robert Ferry Drive, so it's a bit of a walk. But as additional lands are developed in that area, the GRT continually evaluates where the most appropriate bus routes are, where the density is. So they will continue to expand the bus system as more and more developments occur, and when there's a ridership that demands it. So that's something that I expect would grow over the next number of years, together with things like cycle lanes and bike and pedestrian facilities. My understanding is that this section in front of this property is expected for redevelopment in about 2030. So it's a number of years away still. But when that happens, the city will work with them and advocate for those sorts of facilities on that road to help to improve pedestrian and cycling experiences and provide for a range of transit options.
Thank you. I have one more question. Concerns have been raised about POPs, and this is an example. I know that this is a location where there's not a lot of other people who might use that at this moment in time, but is there a possibility to negotiate so that those POPs are truly accessible to the public? Because this one is, you wouldn't even know it's there if you didn't live in that complex. So, I feel like to make it publicly accessible, people need to know it exists, and that's kind of where a layout should exist. When we could, is there a way to go back and forth in future at least to ensure that those park spaces are readily available to others?
Katie, just keep your mic on. Go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair. In this instance, this is a private amenity space. It'll be owned and operated by the condominium, and it really is intended to serve the needs of the people living in that area. They'll also be required to contribute cash to parkland dedication, in addition to dedicating the green space to us. So there is a contribution there, and I don't expect that this park would be easily accessible. There certainly will not be an ability for footpaths or anything through the wetland area due to its sensitivity, so that those spaces are like any other sort of townhouse complex where there's a small amenity space that's really geared for the residents of that community.
Okay, thank you so much.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered if this is located in the Skippa area. I mean, I trust it's within the countryside line, but I just wondered if this was a piece of land that was added to this.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the term Skippa,
Oh.
but it's definitely in the urban area, and it's within the developable section of the city.
No, I figured it was, but I was just curious to know if it's actually what Skippa, you know, how that, no? Okay. Garrett's saying no. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, with that, that's all the questions of staff. Can I get a mover? Moved by Councillor Michaud. And, okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Okay, for the committee's interest, there's an information item, but that's something you can review on your own. With that, we will recess. Anyone in attendance that's waiting for the next phase of this meeting. Council has been on for a while. We have to recess to have our supper. So likely give ourselves half hour. Would that be okay? So we'll be reconvening the meeting at 7:45. Okay, thank you.